Okay, let's dive right in. We all think of DNA as the blueprint of life, right? The code that builds us. But what if that blueprint has another layer of information, a kind of hidden mathematical structure that's organizing the entire genome? Well, today we're going to explore a pretty radical theory that suggests exactly that.
And this isn't some brand new idea. It was actually proposed decades ago, and it all centers on this one concept, a hidden language of genes. The theory basically says that beyond just the code for building proteins, there's a second, global layer of order, a grand overarching pattern that we might have been missing this whole time.
So that's the big question we're tackling here. Could the sequence of A's, T's, C's, and G's, the very letters that make us who we are, be arranged according to some deep mathematical principle? Is there a message hidden in the code itself?
Now, where did this all come from? Well, the origin is this paper right here, published way back in 1991 by a researcher named Jean-Claude Perez. And it laid out a wild theory connecting chaos theory, some famous mathematical numbers, and the very structure of our DNA.
So to even begin looking for a code like this, you can't just stick to traditional biology. You have to grab some pretty unconventional tools from, well, a totally different toolbox, mathematics and physics. Let's see how this whole thing is built.
First up is this idea of chaos. Now, in everyday life, chaos just means a total mess, right? But in chaos theory, it's pretty much the opposite. It's the study of complex systems that look random on the surface, but are actually driven by these deep underlying patterns. Think about the weather or a flock of birds. They seem totally unpredictable, but there's a hidden order to the whole thing.
The second key tool, the Fibonacci sequence. You probably remember this one. You get each number just by adding the two before it. And what's so incredible is that this simple little pattern shows up everywhere in nature. It's in the branching of trees, the spiral of a pine cone, even galaxies. It's almost like a mathematical signature that nature loves to use.
Okay, now here's where it gets really cool. This is where those two big ideas, chaos and natural patterns, might actually connect. The paper argues that the golden ratio, which is super closely related to the Fibonacci sequence, can actually emerge out of the math of fractal chaos. And the logic is pretty straightforward. If this mathematical signature is all over the rest of nature, why on earth wouldn't it be in our DNA too?
So, let's say you suspect there's a hidden harmony in our DNA. How do you actually go about finding it? I mean, where do you even start? Well, this next part breaks down the specific method the researcher came up with to hunt for these patterns.
See, Jean-Claude Perez didn't just have a hunch. He actually created a specific protocol to test his idea. He wanted to see if the building blocks of DNA, the nucleotides A, T, C, and G, were spread out in a way that somehow resonated with these special mathematical numbers. He called it the FLP protocol. It's basically a four-step process. First, he created some numerical sequences based on Fibonacci numbers and the similar Lucas numbers. Second, he took those numbers, like 55, 89, 144, and used them as specific lengths to search for within a DNA sequence. He called these resonant waves. Third, he mapped out exactly where these waves popped up for each of the 4 DNA bases. And finally, he just zoomed out and looked at the big picture to see if it all looked random or if there were signs of some kind of hidden order.
A theory is one thing, but you've got to have evidence, right? So Perez took his protocol and applied it to a real-world example, a specific and very complex human gene.
The test subject was the messenger RNA for the human collagen gene. It's a sequence made up of 1,767 of those nucleotide bases. So this wasn't some simple, short little sequence. This was a complex piece of our genetic machinery, which makes it a perfect place to go looking for a big, global pattern. And here they are, the results, taken directly from that 1991 paper. This table basically summarizes everything his protocol found. It shows how many of those Fibonacci-based resonant waves he detected for each of the 4 nucleotides, T, C, A, and G, and the total volume, or the number of bases they contained.
So, what is this table actually telling us? Well, the most important thing is that the distribution was not flat or random at all. Perez reported finding what he called excess amounts of certain waves for specific bases. At the same time, other patterns were surprisingly rare, almost non-existent. To him, this imbalance was a huge signal of a highly structured, definitely non-random order.
But just how non-random are we talking? Well, this is where the paper makes its most absolutely astonishing claim.
After comparing the real gene to 100 artificially generated ones, Perez calculated the probability of this specific order appearing just by random chance. And the odds he came up with were 1 in 10 to the power of 100. That is a 1 followed by 100 zeros. It's a number so huge, it's hard to even wrap your head around.
And this image does a brilliant job of showing you what that order might actually look like. This figure from the paper maps out the location of those resonant waves for the T and A bases across the whole gene sequence. You can see how these patterns, all based on Fibonacci numbers, are kind of nested and spread throughout the gene, creating what really looks like an intentional architecture.
Okay, so let's just imagine for a second that this mathematical order is real. What would that actually mean? Why would a hidden code like this even matter? This is where we get into the really mind-bending implications.
According to the paper, the applications could be, well, world-changing. Imagine if we could use this global language to predict a protein's shape just from its code. Or what if we could understand genetic mutations on a totally new level? It could let us analyze entire genomes way more efficiently, and maybe even design artificial genes from the ground up, all based on these mathematical rules.
The paper wraps up by connecting this whole idea to one of the greatest minds in science, Alan Turing. He was also obsessed with how Fibonacci numbers shape things in nature, like sunflowers. The suggestion here is that the very same mathematical elegance that builds a flower might also be building the code of life itself.
Now, more than 30 years later, this theory is still out there, still speculative. Is it pointing to some profound, undiscovered law of biology, a golden link between chaos, math, and life itself? Or is it just a beautiful example of us finding a compelling but ultimately coincidental pattern in a really complex set of data? The question of what secrets are still hiding in our DNA, well, it's as fascinating today as it ever was.